A Fortress for the Mind, the history of the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton. From Albert Einstein to Ed Witten, where geniuses are allowed to ponder the mysteries of the universe. Episode 1. Abraham Flexner stood at the window of an airy Princeton office in early 1930, looking out over the gentle slopes that would soon become one of the most remarkable intellectual havens in history. The office was borrowed at the moment. He was still in the planning stages, but through that window he envisioned buildings filled with scholars, freed from the usual obligations of teaching and administrative duties. His dream was radical for an American institution of higher learning. Gather the world's most brilliant minds in one place, give them the time and resources to think deeply, and then see what new frontiers might be unveiled. Flexner, who had a background in reforming medical education, was driven by the conviction that scholarship required both freedom and stability. He had published a piece in 1930 titled "The Usefulness of Useless Knowledge," arguing that theoretical research, unencumbered by immediate practical goals, was the wellspring of future innovations. He believed that the best minds, left to their own devices, would nurture ideas that would transform the world in unpredictable ways. With the help of philanthropist brothers Louis and Caroline Bamberger, he secured the funding to establish this new institute. The Bambergers, successful merchants from Newark, had sold their department store at the right time, and they were eager to create a legacy devoted to higher ideals rather than purely commercial endeavors. Flexner convinced them that their philanthropic vision could be realized in a unique setting, a research institute that resembled nothing then existing in American academia. Convinced by Flexner's passion, the Bambergers agreed to his plan, and the Institute for Advanced Study, IAS, was officially established in 1930. It would not grant degrees and would not impose a strict schedule on its members. There would be no distraction of undergraduate teaching. Instead, a small community of permanent faculty would guide a rotating group of members, postdoctoral researchers, visiting scholars, and other fellows, through the frontier of the sciences and humanities. In the beginning, it was housed in Princeton, close to but separate from Princeton University, a relationship sometimes confused in the public mind. But the distinction was clear to Flexner. The institute was to be autonomous, reliant on private funds, beholden to no one but the ideals of pure research. Flexner's early steps involved enlisting key figures who could lend their prestige and intellectual gravitas to the fledgling institution. One of the first names he thought of was Albert Einstein. Already world famous for his revolutionary work in theoretical physics, his development of the special and general theories of relativity had changed humanity's understanding of time, space, and gravity. By 1932, Einstein was beginning to feel the ominous political winds in his native Germany. He had been offered a position at IAS, and though initially reluctant to leave Europe for good, the rise of the Nazis would soon make his decision almost inevitable. Early in 1933, Einstein, who was visiting the California Institute of Technology, learned that the new German government was enacting policies that targeted Jews and freethinkers. He realized it would be impossible to maintain his position at the Prussian Academy of Sciences in Berlin. When Flexner sent word that the Institute for Advanced Study would welcome him permanently, Einstein accepted. He arrived in Princeton in October 1933. Einstein was 54, hair still dark in places, though it was rapidly turning into the familiar halo of white. To many in the small town, the sight of the professor walking with a violin case under his arm, wearing a rumpled sweater, soon became iconic. At almost the same time, Flexner brought in other luminaries, particularly mathematicians. James W. Alexander, a topologist, and Oswald Veblen were among the earliest mathematicians to join the institute. They helped set the tone that mathematics, alongside theoretical physics, would be the flagship areas in which the IAS would excel. Hermann Weyl, another mathematical titan from Göttingen, fled Nazi Germany and arrived at the institute in 1933, bringing with him a formidable reputation in mathematical physics, group theory, and geometry. John von Neumann also joined around that time. His interest ranged from pure mathematics to quantum mechanics, and later, the nascent field of computing. Flexner was thrilled. Within just a few years, the Institute boasted a cohort of intellectual giants who were transforming mathematics and physics at a rapid pace. By 1934, the Institute had begun to take physical shape on Alden Lane. Tall trees flanked new brick buildings that housed offices and lecture rooms. There was no huge campus, just a serene set of structures that exuded calm and reverence for contemplation. The daily life of the Institute revolved around personal study, occasional seminars, and many hours of informal discussion, often in the Institute's common rooms. Princeton's coffee shops, particularly places close to the university, often found themselves hosting quiet men scribbling notes on napkins while engaged in fierce but polite debates about advanced geometry or quantum paradoxes. In those early years, something extraordinary took root. Conversations that began in hallways or at the cafeteria tables might spark a new approach to an unsolved problem. Einstein would wander into Weil's office and ask for clarifications about group theory in relation to gauge invariance. Von Neumann would propose a puzzle about operator algebras, which might then inspire others to think about the foundations of quantum mechanics. This synergy, so central to Flexner's dream, was becoming a daily reality. Ideas seemed to echo in the corridors, and new theoretical frameworks emerged with astonishing frequency. Einstein himself, though he had completed his most groundbreaking work before coming to the Institute, entered a new phase of scientific life. He was searching for a unified field theory that would merge electromagnetism and gravity into one coherent mathematical framework. Though he would never succeed in finalizing such a theory, his relentless pursuit influenced many young physicists who observed the grand old man's dedication. In the quiet offices, one could sometimes hear the soft scratching of Einstein's pen as he tried new equations. Although reclusive by temperament, he was approachable. There is a well-documented conversation from November 1933. Young mathematician John Archibald Wheeler, then just visiting Princeton, wrote in his diary that he had mustered the courage to knock on Einstein's door, and Einstein, smiling politely, invited him in with the words, "Come in, you have equations on your mind, I can see." Perhaps the greatest testament to the ethos Flexner cherished was the freedom to chase curious, sometimes abstract, lines of thought. Members of the Institute were not forced to produce immediate results, nor did they have to adhere to a strict curriculum. This attitude bore fruit in the early, notable achievements in mathematics. Weil produced influential papers on differential geometry and group theory. Von Neumann embarked on foundational studies that would lead to the theory of games and the creation of the digital computer, and Alexander continued his topological investigations, focusing on the properties of three manifolds that still influence the field. Kurt Gödel, who famously proved his incompleteness theorems in 1931, demonstrating that any sufficiently powerful formal system cannot prove all truths within its own framework, was another vital addition to the Institute. He first visited in the mid-1930s, and in 1939 he became a permanent member. Gödel was painfully shy, prone to bouts of hypochondria, and overshadowed by personal anxieties that would haunt him for his entire life. Yet his brilliance in logic was unparalleled. He and Einstein found an intellectual rapport. Both disliked the conventional notion of time, and Gödel eventually discovered peculiar solutions to Einstein's field equations that implied the possibility of closed time-like curves, effectively suggesting time travel. Over lunches, Einstein and Gödel could be seen strolling around the Institute grounds. It was rumored that on their walks they debated the nature of reality and time itself. Gödel was quite serious about the implications of his rotating universe solutions, while Einstein, though intrigued, often concluded these were fascinating curiosities rather than physically realistic models. From the mid-1930s onward, Flexner watched in satisfaction as the IAS reputation soared. Scholars fleeing Europe's turmoil found refuge among the Institute's newly built walls. Physicists like Wolfgang Pauli visited regularly. Mathematicians such as André Weil spent time there. Philosophers, historians, and classicists would come in due course, drawn to the Institute's expanding School of Historical Studies and School of Social Science. But mathematics and physics remained the jewel in the crown, the reason the Institute appeared in the public imagination as a sanctuary for geniuses. In December 1933, the local paper recorded an informal gathering in which Einstein played the violin while Weil accompanied him on the piano. The story was unconfirmed, a rumor more than anything else, but it sparked a lively discussion among townspeople about these brilliant men who had come from Europe, bringing both a sense of gravitas and a gentle sense of humor. Einstein's well-known remark, "Life without playing music is inconceivable for me," might have sprung from a moment like that. Princeton seemed to cradle their genius in a setting reminiscent of an old European academic town, yet unburdened by the centuries-old constraints and hierarchies they had left behind. That was the promise Flexner had set out to fulfill. In the soft light of a Princeton winter afternoon, the Institute's earliest members, Einstein among them, discovered that the only real demands placed upon them were those of their own curiosity and imagination. Episode 2. By the late 1930s, the Institute for Advanced Study was humming with intellectual energy. The broader world, however, was on the brink of unimaginable crisis. Across the Atlantic, Europe slid into war. Scientists and scholars, many of them Jewish or politically dissident, recognized that crossing the ocean was no longer a matter of mere career enhancement, but a matter of survival. This influx of émigrés reinforced the Institute's place as a magnet for the greatest minds of the era. While Einstein and Weil were already ensconced in Princeton, figures such as Max Born, Hans Bethe, and Erwin Panofsky visited for extended periods. John von Neumann, hailing from Hungary, put down deeper roots in the United States and began collaborating with a wide array of researchers. Von Neumann's office lights often burned late into the night. One caretaker would later recall that the professor with the thick accent and the quick humor never seemed to sleep. The atmosphere at the Institute was paradoxically serene in its day-to-day routine, scholars walking the wooded paths, discussing logic or number theory. Yet beneath it all, the moral and existential weight of the war loomed. Einstein, deeply disturbed by the Nazi atrocities, renounced his German citizenship for the second time in his life. He had previously become a Swiss citizen before returning to Germany. He collaborated with other scientists on the question of how theoretical physics might affect the war effort. In August 1939, at the urging of Hungarian physicist Leo Szilard, Einstein signed the famous letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, warning that the discovery of nuclear fission could lead to the development of extremely powerful bombs. This letter would ultimately catalyze the Manhattan Project. Though Einstein himself never worked on the atomic bomb, that letter was a significant turning point in American research policy. One day in autumn 1941, the hush of the Institute's hallways was broken by quiet rumors that the U.S. government was recruiting theoretical physicists for an ultra-secret project related to atomic energy. Scholars like Eugene Wigner and John von Neumann were becoming more involved in hush-hush government committees. Von Neumann's expertise in mathematical modeling and shockwave calculations would soon make him instrumental in the implosion design of the plutonium bomb. His mental dexterity in advanced mathematics was matched only by a capacity to adapt these ideas to practical engineering challenges. While the war raged, a young American theoretical physicist named J. Robert Oppenheimer, at that time primarily based at the University of California, Berkeley, was simultaneously recognized for his brilliance and questioned for his political leanings. He, too, visited Princeton and gave lectures at the Institute, wowing peers with his depth of knowledge in quantum mechanics, astrophysics, and nuclear physics. Oppenheimer cut a striking figure, slim, chain-smoking, possessed of a formidable intellect, and a penchant for quoting Baudelaire or Sanskrit scripture at unexpected moments. In private discussions with the Institute's members, Oppenheimer showed an interest in the very same spirit that guided IAS work, pure intellectual inquiry, whether it led to cosmic questions about black holes or the intricate dance of quantum wave functions. It was a swirl of personalities in those pre-war and wartime years. Kurt Gödel, now more settled at the Institute, had gained a reputation for brilliance tinged with eccentricity. One story goes that Gödel was at a small dinner gathering with Einstein and others. The conversation turned to the newly drafted Constitution of the Institute, which was largely ceremonial. Gödel, who had been studying American constitutional law in preparation for his U.S. citizenship exam, began explaining how he believed he found a logical flaw that could theoretically allow the American system to become a dictatorship. Einstein reportedly found Gödel's argument entertaining, but ultimately brushed it aside with a slight grin, telling him, "Our friend is too rigorous for the real world." Yet, years later, there would be an anecdote about Gödel actually explaining this potential constitutional loophole during his citizenship hearing in 1947, only to be gently hushed by the presiding judge. Whether the precise details are accurate or embellished, the story captures Gödel's insistence on absolute logical consistency in all things. Meanwhile, the mathematics community at the Institute saw intense debates about Hilbert's problems, set theory, and the foundations of quantum mechanics. Von Neumann's treatise on operator algebras, crucial to quantum theory, was advanced in these years. Weyl was refining the new language of gauge theories, an extension of the idea that symmetries govern the fundamental forces of nature. Conversations moved fluidly from geometry to physics. The boundary lines between the two disciplines seemed to evaporate in Princeton's rarefied air. Einstein occasionally stepped into these discussions, though he remained steadfast in his quest for a unified field theory, occasionally lamenting that quantum mechanics seemed too incomplete for his tastes. He once commented to a colleague over tea, "God may be subtle, but he is not malicious," a remark often paraphrased as, "God does not play dice." Einstein could not reconcile the probabilistic nature of quantum mechanics with a vision of a deterministic universe. But war had a way of pulling even the most abstract minds into the practical sphere of national defense. As 1942 turned to 1943, the Manhattan Project secretly gathered steam in Los Alamos under Oppenheimer's leadership. Several Institute members were lured temporarily to New Mexico, including von Neumann. The once quiet focus on pure theory now ran in parallel with an urgent mission to end a war and prevent the Axis powers from developing nuclear weapons first. Von Neumann's frequent visits to Los Alamos never fully removed him from IAS, but in those periods, his office lights were no longer the last to go out at night. Instead, stories drifted back from the desert about computing machines, early analog devices, and expansions of ideas that would later shape the entire digital age. Those left behind at IAS continued their research as best they could. The cafeteria or the common room discussions still pivoted on questions of geometry, prime numbers, or the structure of the cosmos. Einstein, worried though he was about the war, found some comfort in daily walks with Gödel. Weyl produced a series of lectures that would later be published as The Classical Groups, Bridging Group Theory with Geometry and Physics. Abraham Flexner, now older, observed all this with a mixture of pride and unease. He had founded the Institute to protect the sanctity of pure knowledge, but the world's crises had shown that such knowledge could become entangled in very real and sometimes grim applications. In a letter to a friend, Flexner wrote, "We are watchers of distant lights here in Princeton, but it seems that the stars we watch can burn across the boundaries of war and peace. Let us hope that in the end, knowledge guides us to wisdom, not just power." This letter, dated 1944, captured the tension that would continue to define the Institute's relationship to world events. Nonetheless, the spirit of unbounded inquiry persisted. No one was forced to do war-related research, and many continued to ignore the call of immediate practicalities. In 1945, after the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the war ended. The sense of relief around the world was profound, but so was the anxiety over what had been unleashed. A few institute members confided to diaries or to each other that they felt both pride and a measure of horror at how theoretical physics had been harnessed. J. Robert Oppenheimer's role as father of the atomic bomb was destined to become a complicated legacy. As the war's dust settled, he would soon return to his intellectual passions and, in a development that would profoundly shape the Institute, assume a leadership role at the very place that had nurtured so much of the theoretical framework behind the bomb. Episode 3. On an unseasonably warm day in 1947, J. Robert Oppenheimer walked up the path leading to the Institute for Advanced Studies main building. The war was over, and Oppenheimer, having directed the Los Alamos laboratory, was widely hailed as a hero of science, though he carried visible fatigue from the weight of that accomplishment. He was taking the reins as director of the institute, succeeding Frank Adelot. For Abraham Flexner, who had stepped away from day-to-day operations, Oppenheimer's appointment was both surprising and exhilarating. The man who had stood at the nexus of theoretical physics and practical warfare was now to guide the IAS in peacetime scholarship. Oppenheimer was a slender figure, always with a pipe or a cigarette in hand. His piercing eyes seemed to survey everything around him, from the architecture of the institute to the finer nuances of philosophical argument. He spoke in measured tones, mixing references from poetry and Eastern philosophy into scientific discourse. In his first address as director, a small, informal gathering in the Institute's lecture hall, Oppenheimer said, "We stand at a threshold. The world has seen what knowledge can do when employed with determination, but also haste and fear. Now it is our charge here to pursue knowledge for its own sake again, to ask questions that may not bring us immediate worldly advantage, but may reveal deeper truths about our universe and ourselves." Under Oppenheimer's leadership, the Institute expanded its purview in the humanities, attracting scholars such as art historian Erwin Panofsky, who had already been in Princeton but was now more permanently attached to IAS, and the economist and social scientist Clifford Geertz in later years. The School of Historical Studies thrived under Oppenheimer's encouragement, eventually boasting luminaries who studied everything from ancient Greek philosophy to modern political theory. Still, theoretical physics and mathematics remained the heart of the Institute's reputation. Oppenheimer himself resumed deep scientific reflection on quantum field theory and cosmic rays. He was known to invite young physicists to short private discussions. One anecdote from that period recounts how Freeman Dyson, then a rising theoretical physicist and mathematician from England, had a chance encounter with Oppenheimer in the hallway. Oppenheimer had recently read Dyson's paper on quantum electrodynamics, QED, which attempted to unify Richard Feynman's and Julian Schwinger's approaches. The director paused, tapped ash from his cigarette, and said quietly, "I believe you've tamed infinities no one else could quite corral." Dyson, stunned by the praise, could only nod. He would go on to make the Institute his intellectual home, contributing significantly to QED and becoming a legendary figure in physics and mathematics circles. The post-war years also saw the Institute begin a slow but steady engagement with computing. John von Neumann returned from his war work with an intense fascination for building a programmable electronic computer. In the basement of the Institute, he spearheaded the development of the IAS machine, one of the earliest stored program computers in the world. Although physically modest by modern standards, occupying a large room composed of vacuum tubes with memory stored on cathode ray tubes, this machine laid out an architecture that would become the blueprint for almost all modern computers. The von Neumann architecture, as it came to be called, separated memory from the central processing unit and allowed instructions to be stored as data. This revolutionized how people thought about computing. Oppenheimer was initially cautious about the project. He often joked that the basement sounded like an orchestra of fans and circuits. But as results emerged, whether in calculations for fluid dynamics or in exploring complex differential equations, he acknowledged its significance. On one memorable occasion, he told von Neumann, "You have harnessed logic into a machine that can outrun our own capacities. Let us hope it never outsmarts us, von Neumann replied with a grin. We'll do our best to remain a step ahead. Meanwhile, Einstein continued his unified field theory searches, though aging and increasingly isolated in his convictions. He grew skeptical of the new directions quantum physics had taken, feeling that the search for deterministic completeness was being neglected. Nonetheless, he engaged younger researchers who sought his opinion on gravitational theory. Though polite, he often gently insisted that quantum mechanics required deeper clarification. In 1949, he authored an article titled Autobiographical Notes, reflecting on his life's work and philosophical standpoint. The piece is now a classic in the history of science, marking Einstein's attempts to tie together a half-century of revolutionary physics. Kurt Gödel still strolled the grounds with Einstein, the two men forging a peculiar bond. The story of Gödel's citizenship hearing became institute law. In 1947, Einstein and Institute mathematician Moritz Schlick, or, according to other accounts, the economist Oscar Morgenstern, there are variations, accompanied Gödel to the local courthouse. When Gödel began expounding on how the Constitution contained a logical flaw that might permit a dictatorship, the presiding judge politely changed the subject. Einstein, noticing the tension, gave Gödel a nudge, effectively saving him from inadvertently creating a spectacle. Gödel did become an American citizen, but the event only added to his reputation as a brilliant eccentric. Under Oppenheimer, the Institute also saw an influx of visiting scholars from all over the world. He had a gift for conversation that bridged the gaps between disciplines. Many evenings, an eclectic group of physicists, mathematicians, historians, and classicists gathered at Oppenheimer's home on Alden Lane, sipping sherry while discussing everything from nuclear policy to the poetry of T.S. Eliot. It was in these settings that the Institute's interdisciplinary spirit truly shone. A mathematician might find unexpected insight from a historian's perspective on ancient numerals, or a physicist might learn about conceptual frameworks from philosophy. Yet the political world intruded once again. The dawn of the Cold War cast suspicion on scientists who had left-leaning sympathies, especially if they had been involved in the Manhattan Project. Oppenheimer, who had once had flirtations with left-wing politics, found himself under FBI surveillance. As the Red Scare intensified, allegations about his loyalty surfaced, culminating in the infamous 1954 security hearings. Though the Institute itself was not a government entity, Oppenheimer's directorship and prestige meant that these hearings reverberated through its halls. The U.S. Atomic Energy Commission eventually stripped Oppenheimer of his security clearance. A transcript of the hearing reveals Oppenheimer's anguish. "I have been punished for my sins," he said at one point, capturing both his sense of responsibility and betrayal. Though Oppenheimer remained director of the IAS until 1966, the experience left him emotionally scarred. Many Institute members rallied to his defense, including Einstein, who famously said, "The trouble with Oppenheimer is that he loves a woman who doesn't love him, the United States government." That might be apocryphal or paraphrased, but it captures Einstein's sympathy and cynicism. The episode strained Oppenheimer's public stature, but within the Institute he remained a respected figure, guiding expansions in the humanities and encouraging the mathematicians and physicists with unwavering support. In 1955, Einstein died at the age of 76. His passing marked the end of an era for the Institute. Though he had been less socially involved in his later years, the mere presence of his towering intellect in those corridors was deeply ingrained in the Institute's identity. Princeton mourned the man who had redefined the cosmos. Gödel, inconsolable, withdrew further into solitude, rarely venturing out except at odd hours. By then, the Institute had established itself as a bastion of free inquiry, thanks in large part to Einstein's name and aura. Oppenheimer, in a rare moment of public sentiment, said, "We will not see the like of him again, in mind, in spirit, in moral force." Episode 4. After Einstein's death, the Institute confronted the question of how to carry on its intellectual legacy. For decades, Einstein's presence had symbolized the confluence of freedom and genius that the IAS championed. With Oppenheimer still at the helm, the institute continued to attract remarkable minds. In mathematics, the post-Einstein era saw a surge in breakthroughs. Alexander Grothendieck, though never a permanent member, visited at times, revolutionizing algebraic geometry with an abstraction that baffled and inspired colleagues. At the Institute, Grothendieck's ideas found fertile ground in discussions with André Weil, who was a permanent member. These conversations, full of category theory and new ways of thinking about spaces and schemes, pushed the boundaries of 20th century mathematics. Weil, known for his foundational work in number theory, matched Grothendieck's abstractions with a classical rigor that only sharpened the new theories. In physics, the next generation continued to explore quantum field theory and the nascent field of particle physics. Freeman Dyson became a central figure, not just in bridging various formulations of QED, but also in encouraging younger scientists to question orthodoxies. When a brash young Richard Feynman, who was more strongly affiliated with Caltech, spent a few sabbatical weeks at the Institute, Dyson facilitated heated discussions about renormalization. Tales of blackboard arguments fill the anecdotal memory of many who were there. According to one story, Feynman once exclaimed, "What you guys call beautiful is what I call it actually works," prompting laughter and a minor scuffle over chalk. Though Feynman never joined IAS permanently, these visits became legendary moments of cross-pollination. The Institute's School of Historical Studies also entered a golden phase under Oppenheimer's encouragement. Scholars like Ernst Kantorowicz and Arnaldo Momigliano delved into medieval history and classical scholarship with a rigor and creativity reminiscent of the mathematicians. Oppenheimer felt that the humanities, too, required periods of deep, unstructured reflection. A historian might spend months in quiet reading, then emerge with a monograph that changed the entire landscape of a field. The synergy at the Institute meant that a medieval historian could easily engage in conversation with a mathematician at lunch, each gleaning new insights into structure, logic, and the development of human thought. However, political tensions of the Cold War era did not dissipate quickly. Oppenheimer remained a polarizing figure nationally. While his directorship of the IAS was secure, his influence on U.S. science policy waned. In the mid-1950s, the Institute wrestled with whether it should explicitly distance itself from political controversies. Ultimately, the board decided that academic freedom was paramount. They would stand by Oppenheimer. In 1957, the Institute began constructing new buildings to accommodate the growth of its programs. Oppenheimer ensured that the architecture would remain simple, in line with the original aesthetic. No towering spires, just expansions of quiet corridors and more offices looking out onto the forests and ponds. By day, the campus remained tranquil, but at night, lights glowed from certain offices where problems in number theory or quantum mechanics kept the occupant awake. It was during this time that a young Stephen Hawking visited the Institute briefly, though his most important work would be done in Cambridge. Others, like the British physicist Paul Dirac, spent sabbaticals at the IAS, giving lectures on the interplay between general relativity and quantum mechanics. Observers from that period recall a sense that the next great revolution in physics might emerge from these hallways. The tension between Einstein's reluctance to accept quantum indeterminacy and the new wave of quantum theorists still reverberated, as if the Institute itself were a stage for that ongoing dialogue. Oppenheimer's health began to decline in the early 1960s. Privately, he confided to a few friends that he felt he had not accomplished the scientific breakthroughs he had hoped for after the war, but he remained a beacon for many young scientists, reminding them that the mind's curiosity is the most powerful force we possess. In 1966, he stepped down as director, succeeded by the mathematician Carl Kazin, though Kazin's official title was not exactly director in the same sense. That same year, Oppenheimer was diagnosed with throat cancer, likely a consequence of his lifelong chain smoking. He passed away in 1967, leaving behind a complicated legacy of brilliance, moral struggle, and dedication to the unbridled pursuit of knowledge. Those who knew him at the Institute spoke of his ability to foster an environment where crossing disciplinary boundaries was a norm, not an exception. They recalled gatherings at his home where the conversation might start with nuclear policy, shift to the interpretation of quantum mechanics, detour into Renaissance art, and end with a reading of French poetry. One of his final remarks to a colleague, recorded in a personal diary, was, "In the search for truth, we must be prepared to follow wherever it leads, especially when it leads us away from comfort." The colleague noted that, with those words, Oppenheimer had epitomized the spirit of the IAS. As the 1970s dawned, new voices rose to prominence at the Institute. Mathematicians like Atle Selberg advanced the study of modular forms and L functions, connecting deep aspects of number theory. Shiying Shen Chern, another frequent visitor, contributed profoundly to differential geometry, influencing everything from topology to theoretical physics. The Institute's environment encouraged these leaps, offering sanctuary from university politics and heavy teaching loads. Scholars could brood on a problem for years if they wished. Many did just that, often emerging with a gem that redefined their field. Kurt Gödel also remained, though increasingly reclusive. He had, by this point, turned some of his vast intellect toward philosophy and questions of the afterlife, as well as rewriting large tracts of Principia Mathematica in his own annotated style. He worried about his health incessantly. He avoided most social gatherings, but occasionally penned letters to younger logicians, providing comments on their work with exquisite depth. In 1978, Gödel passed away, succumbing to self-imposed malnutrition due to paranoia about being poisoned. It was a sad end for a genius who had revealed the limits of formal systems. His death, so soon after Einstein's and Oppenheimer's, felt like the last page in the Institute's founding epic. But new chapters were about to be written. Episode 5. In the 1980s and 1990s, the Institute for Advanced Study entered a phase of renewal, guided by fresh minds who continued its tradition of bridging theoretical depth with wide-ranging curiosity. One of the standout figures was Edward Witten, a theoretical physicist who had begun making waves in the late 1970s for his work on supersymmetry and high-energy physics. By the early 1980s, Witten's research on string theory and quantum field theory was transforming the landscape of theoretical physics, and he found in the Institute the perfect environment for exploring the mathematical underpinnings of these highly abstract ideas. Witten, soft-spoken but with an intense focus, joined the Institute's permanent faculty in 1987. He walked the corridors that Einstein, Oppenheimer, and Gödel had once traversed, but his interests lay at the intersection of mathematics and physics in a way that was newly invigorated by string theory. Rather than confining himself to quantum theory alone, Witten ventured into topological quantum field theories, discovering deep connections between knot theory, manifold invariance, and the geometry of gauge fields. He developed what came to be known as topological quantum field theory, TQFT, providing new insights into four-manifold theory. Mathematicians marveled at how Witten's physical ideas offered novel routes to solve purely mathematical problems. Andrew Wiles, across town at Princeton University, would be among those watching carefully. During these years, a new generation of physicists gathered around Witten and others at the Institute, hashing out everything from M-theory, an extension of string theory that encompassed multiple versions of higher dimensional brain theories, to the search for a unified view of all fundamental interactions. Witten's presence, combined with the Institute's storied tradition, turned IAS into a veritable mecca for string theorists. Visitors from around the globe, Michael Green, John Schwartz, Kumrun Vafa, Juan Maldacena, passed through, fueling an ongoing revolution in theoretical physics. Maldacena, who joined the institute in the late 1990s, would later propose the AD-CFT correspondence, bridging quantum gravity in an anti-de Sitter space with conformal field theory in one fewer dimension. This audacious conjecture, partly incubated in the quiet offices of the institute, opened up entirely new vistas for understanding quantum gravity. The lunch discussions became legendary. A mathematician might overhear talk of holography and realize it related to deep results in geometry, prompting an exchange of ideas that would carry late into the afternoon. During this period, mathematics at the institute also flourished, buoyed by the close interplay with physics. The School of Mathematics continued to push forward with faculty like Pierre Deligne, who built on Grothendieck's foundational work and delved into algebraic geometry, number theory, and representation theory. Deligne's proof of the Weil conjectures in 1974 had already secured him a place among the greats, and at the IAS he continued exploring the deep connections between geometry and number theory. Robert Langlands, though based at Princeton University for part of his career, was a major figure at the institute too, furthering the Langlands program that tied together Galois groups, automorphic forms, and representation theory. This tapestry of advanced mathematics thrived on the synergy with high-energy physics. Characteristically, the institute in these years preserved its hallowed calm. Scholars in quiet offices pursued arcs of thought that might stretch across a decade. Unlike many universities, there was minimal bureaucracy here. No large classes to teach, no departmental politics over resource allocation. Some visitors recounted how they would arrive for a 6-month stay, expecting to finalize a project, only to discover an entirely new line of inquiry after a chance conversation at tea time. In the broader cultural context, the 1980s and 1990s were a time of technological explosion. Personal computers and the internet were emerging, connecting the world in ways unimaginable a few decades earlier. The Institute, though focused on theoretical questions, did not remain untouched. Discussions about computational complexity, cryptography, and even the potential of quantum computing occasionally percolated through the corridors. Mathematicians like Avi Wigderson, who joined the Institute in the late 1990s and eventually became a permanent faculty member, advanced theories of computational complexity, exploring the boundaries of P versus NP and other fundamental problems. This work, though seemingly separate from Witten's domain, found occasional resonance. Information theory intersected with the puzzling nature of black hole entropy and holographic principles. Yet, the Institute never lost sight of the humanities. The School of Historical Studies continued to attract leading figures in ancient, medieval, and modern history. With the fall of the Soviet Union, new archival materials became available, and some Institute historians dug into those sources to rewrite aspects of 20th century history. The historian Peter Brown, for instance, known for his studies of late antiquity, spent time at IAS refining his groundbreaking work on the transition from classical antiquity to the Middle Ages. The School of Social Science, founded in 1973, brought anthropologists, sociologists, and economists who explored the interplay of culture and economic systems. Clifford Geertz, who was there for many years, shaped anthropological theory by emphasizing the interpretive nature of cultural practices. The 1990s also saw the Institute confront questions of diversity and inclusion. Historically, the IAS had been male-dominated, as was much of mathematics and theoretical physics. But new efforts emerged to invite more women scholars and underrepresented minorities. Though progress was slow, the conversation began to shift, signaling a willingness to reflect on the Institute's role in a broader societal context. By the dawn of the 21st century, the Institute's legacy was firmly established, yet it remained far from static. Edward Witten, whose mind soared from knots in three-dimensional manifolds to the geometry of 10 or 11-dimensional string theories, embodied this continuity. In him, one could see the spirit of Einstein's quest for unification, the abstract rigor of Gödel, the intellectual breadth of Oppenheimer, and the crossing of disciplinary lines that Weil and von Neumann had once championed. The stage was set for yet another evolution, as new areas like quantum information, advanced number theory, and new historical methodologies converged in that small patch of Princeton. Episode 6. In the new millennium, the Institute for Advanced Study continued to be a luminary in the intellectual firmament, even as the world of science and scholarship evolved at breakneck speed. The quiet campus on Olden Lane remained a haven for deep thought, carefully sheltered from the noise of everyday academia. Edward Witten stood at the forefront of theoretical physics, widely considered one of the most mathematically gifted physicists since perhaps Paul Dirac. He ventured into new realms, including topological string theory, mirror symmetry, and more applications of the ADS-CFT correspondence. His work, increasingly collaborative with top mathematicians, sometimes involved co-authoring papers that looked more like advanced geometry treatises than physics manuscripts. Readers might find rigorous proofs alongside quantum field calculations, exemplifying how far the marriage of mathematics and physics had come. And in Witten's seminars, one sensed the presence of history's echoes. Einstein's ghost might have nodded approvingly at the audacity of searching for a unifying framework that explained the cosmos at its most fundamental level. At the same time, the School of Mathematics welcomed new talents who probed deep questions about prime distributions, geometric representation theory, and expansions of the Langlands program. One such figure, the French mathematician Laurent Laforgue, solved major conjectures in the Langlands program around 2002, strengthening the ties between number theory and algebraic geometry. The corridors buzzed with the sense that these breakthroughs were part of a lineage stretching back to Weil, von Neumann, and the early influences of the Institute. The Institute's historians, meanwhile, leveraged global collaborations and the digitization of archives to craft narratives that spanned continents and centuries. Studies on the formation of ancient empires, the spread of religions, and the development of modern nation-states found new depth in cross-referencing with archaeological data, linguistic analysis, and even genetic studies. These expansions mirrored the interdisciplinary spirit that Oppenheimer had championed decades earlier. There were also new directions in the School of Social Science. Scholars examined globalization, market systems, and the complexities of international law, while older generation luminaries like Clifford Geertz had retired or passed on. New thinkers took up the mantle, bridging social theory with quantitative methods informed by the computational explosion of the 21st century. Data science, though not a formal discipline at the IS, began to appear in the conversations of mathematicians and social scientists alike. Questions about complexity, networks, and emergent phenomena forged new alliances between fields that once hardly intersected. Outside the Institute's walls, the early 21st century witnessed the rapid growth of Silicon Valley, the rise of machine learning, and new frontiers in biotech. The Institute, though not directly oriented toward immediate technological applications, saw the lines of inquiry shift subtly. Seminars on quantum computing drew both physicists and computer scientists into lively debates. A.V. Wigderson's group delved into foundational aspects of computational theory, investigating randomness, encryption, and complexity classes. Although the Institute's mission remained the pursuit of useless knowledge, it was clear that the ideas gestating there often shaped critical technologies just a few years down the line. Amid these changes, the memory of past giants lingered. Images of Einstein hung in some offices, not as idols, but as reminders of a tradition. The strange loop of Gödel's incompleteness hovered as a caution about the limits of formal systems. Von Neumann's computer architecture formed the basis of the laptops that many IAS visitors carried, ironically bridging the gap between 1940s basement hardware and 21st century miniaturized electronics. And Oppenheimer's legacy persisted in the ethical reflection that accompanied scientific discovery. His story, including the security hearings, was taught in historical studies seminars as a case of genius enmeshed in the moral complexities of government and war. One remarkable event in the 2000s was the official unveiling of the Institute's new computing facilities, named in honor of von Neumann. Though mostly symbolic, it celebrated the tradition of innovation he had sparked. Alumni, members, and faculty gathered for the dedication, recalling that basement full of vacuum tubes and blinking lights from the 1950s. Now, a cluster of high-performance servers hummed away, enabling advanced simulations in physics and crunching massive data sets for mathematics. Ed Witten gave a brief speech reflecting on how the power of computation had become an indispensable ally in exploring quantum field theories, especially in strongly coupled regimes that defied simple analytic methods. During the same period, the Institute's communal life remained understated but vibrant. Tea time at 3 p.m. was still a near-sacred tradition, a chance for mathematicians, physicists, historians, and social scientists to mingle. Conversations meandered from the everyday, weather, local events, to the cosmic, new insights into quantum cosmology, or perhaps fresh historical evidence about ancient trading routes. Many a collaboration sprang from an offhand remark during these breaks, capturing the ineffable synergy that has always characterized the IAS. The 2010s ushered in new developments in string theory and quantum gravity. The discovery of the Higgs boson at CERN in 2012, though not an IAS project per se, spurred fresh interest in beyond standard model physics. Witten and colleagues explored the interface between phenomenology and the theoretical frameworks that might unify forces, though direct observational evidence for string theory remained elusive. The Institute served as a think tank for radical new approaches, including the notion that space-time itself might be emergent from entangled quantum states, a concept reminiscent of Gödel's perplexing approach to the structure of time. The mathematicians, with their robust frameworks for understanding geometry and algebraic structures, found a new playground in these ideas about emergent geometry from quantum information principles. Throughout these decades, the Institute faced occasional criticism for its narrowness. Some in the broader academic world felt that it fostered an elitist environment, yet many of those who worked or visited there insisted that the freedom from teaching and administrative burdens was precisely what allowed them to make leaps in understanding. The rotating membership each year also ensured an infusion of fresh perspectives. Younger scholars often arrived wide-eyed, thrilled to find themselves in offices once occupied by luminaries. They left months or years later with sharpened ideas and new connections that would define their careers. Today, as the 21st century moves on, the Institute stands as a testament to Abraham Flexner's original dream. The synergy of mathematics and physics is as vibrant as ever. The historical studies, social science, and now even emerging fields like theoretical biology or advanced computation find a place in the quiet offices. The spirit of useless knowledge, knowledge pursued for its own sake, remains at the heart of the Institute's mission. And yet, as history has shown, these useless breakthroughs tend to become the foundation for transformative ideas and technologies. The story of the Institute for Advanced Study is, in essence, the story of visionary minds coming together in a context where ideas can flourish unimpeded. From Einstein's arrival in 1933, fleeing the horrors of Nazism, through Oppenheimer's stewardship and moral struggles, to Gödel's haunting brilliance, to Ed Witten's revolutionary insights into quantum field theory, the IAS has continually played host to the sharp edge of human thought. Its members have cracked open new domains, formalized vast theories, and shaped how we understand the universe, both at the most fundamental scales of matter and energy and in the grand sweep of human civilization. As one walks today through the corridors and peeks into the offices, they might see equations scrawled on blackboards that hint at hidden symmetries of the cosmos. They might find historians piecing together the life of an obscure medieval figure whose story opens a window into an entire epoch. They might see mathematicians hunched over notes on hyperbolic geometry or elliptic curves, forging new connections that may take years to crystallize. And they might well catch a glimpse of Ed Witten or another faculty member quietly discussing a subtle point of gauge theory with a visiting colleague. echoing those storied conversations between Einstein and Gödel so many decades ago. This continuum of intellectual endeavor is the Institute's greatest achievement, an environment that cultivates and protects pure curiosity from generation to generation across continents and disciplines. Founded in a tumultuous era, shaped by war, directed by men of towering gifts and complicated legacies, the Institute has remained, as Flexner intended, a sanctuary for the mind's boldest explorations. For nearly a century, it has been a place where wonders can unfold, where the intangible meets the rigorous, and where the pursuit of knowledge, useless or otherwise, transforms our understanding of what it means to be human.